here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing. Distrust and verify, that is the rhetoric, a startling line from the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's speech about China last Thursday. Pompeo advocates discontinuing so-called blind engagement with China. He said the free world must change China or China will surely change us. That's at least according to his rhetoric. With U.S. President Donald Trump tailing badly in the polls as the election nears, his national security team has intensified their attacks on China in recent weeks. Is Pompeo's speech a declaration of a new Cold War against China? How much credibility does he have as a diplomat? Will some administration officials push the bilateral relations toward a point of no return? Let's loop in our panelists from both sides. For China-U.S. ties, we have in Beijing Da Wei, Assistant President and Professor from University of International Relations. In Washington, D.C., Michael O'Hanlon, Senior Fellow and Director of Research for Foreign Policy at the Brookings Institution. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. We have seen dramatic changes, apparently, of the relations over the past few weeks. Now, Professor Da, what do you make of the speech given by the Secretary of State in front of the Nixon Library, supposedly changing the U.S. approach to China?
I think we strongly disagree with what Secretary Pompeo said in the speech. I think the engagement strategy that the U.S. adopted in past several decades benefited to both countries, and both countries, I think, benefited a lot from that strategy. And of course, time has changed, environment has changed. I agree that maybe the engagement strategy should be changed or should be adjusted, but it should not be changed into confrontation or hostile competition strategy, which I think, Pompeo implied in his speech.
Is it strategic or is it tactic?
There's both, because in a way Secretary Pompeo is reflecting the shifts in American thinking that go back at least to the Obama administration, perhaps even to some extent to the Bush administration, when the United States became concerned that China's growing power would allow it to threaten the international order more than before. And also when the United States became concerned that China was not playing by the rules of the international economic order on matters like trade and protection of intellectual property. So in one sense, Pompeo's speech is no huge surprise. And obviously, Vice President Pence had given similar speeches in the past. And so just because you hear it now from the Secretary of State doesn't necessarily mean it's brand new, because we had heard this from the Vice President before. On the other hand, we know the Trump administration is an unusual administration in the United States. Many of us in the foreign policy community find it to be not reflective of most American foreign policy thinking and worrisome in some of the approaches that it takes. And we also sense that the Trump team is trying very hard to create some big changes that might endure even if Trump loses the election in November, to make such big changes that they are hard to reverse for President Biden or anyone else. So I think part of the tone is new and special to the Trump administration and therefore tactical and political. But part of it does reflect, as the professor said, a shift in American thinking that is quite bipartisan.
These are numbers out of many numbers in terms of describing what the bilateral relations has been about since the establishment of diplomatic ties. According to the latest Institute of International Education Statistics, in the academic year 2018 to 2019, there were nearly 1.1 million international students in the U.S. Colleges and universities. Nearly 370,000 of them were Chinese. On the other hand, the number of American students in China totaled about 11,600 as of year 2018, and this is 1 year only we are talking about. There are so many different layers of relations, from diplomatic relations, political relations, strategic relations, geopolitical relations, to economic and trade relations, to academic and also exchanges, people-to-people relations, person-to-person relations. Now, what quality does the Secretary of State, Mr. Pompeo, who is not respected either in the United States, in the diplomatic circle, here in China either, to have the guts to say, let's change the policy? Who empowered him to scrap off a relationship that has been established for 40 years with contributions from both sides for generations?
There is a wide accepted consensus maybe in the United States, basically arguing that the old China strategy, old China policy need to be changed. Does that mean to close the consulate, cut the, or even hurt the diplomatic relations? Does that mean to impose tariff, to hurt the economic trade ties? Does that mean to arrest scholars and revoke visas, then to harm the people-to-people exchanges? I don't think my American colleagues all agree with that measures they are taking. We can debate, we can discuss what a new strategy we should have to each other. But I'm quite sure it's not the policy that they are taking now.
Mr. O'Hanlon, what if the Trump administration's goal is to push the China-U.S. relations to an extent that there's no way to come back anymore, even after a new administration comes into power?
Well, I'd say two things. First of all, on the American side, we have an election, as you know, in less than 4 months. And this will be one of the most important elections in my lifetime because the perspectives of the two candidates are extremely different on many issues, including on America's role in the world and the U.S. China relationship. Now, if Trump manages to somehow win this election, it's going to make life more complicated for everyone, including many of us in the United States who will not be happy with that outcome. But I think right now we need to bear in mind that, you know, it's only 3.5 months until Election Day. And we should not get too concerned about the closing of a consulate or other actions like that that are easily fixed. So I worry much more about issues like the use of force, potential for military crisis. Those can lead to issues and dilemmas that cannot be easily repaired. But second, if China were going to try to resolve or at least to mitigate some of these problems, I actually think there is one big thing that China can and should do right now, which is to clarify that its intentions about the South China Sea and the East China Sea are not to impose Chinese sovereignty over all of the waters and not to use force against the interests of other countries. Okay. Yes, it will pursue Chinese interests. No, I have to finish this point because if you really want to improve U.S.-China relations, you're going to have to sometimes hear something from American colleagues you don't enjoy hearing. But China's views on the South China Sea have actually reinforced the concern in the United States in both Democratic and Republican circles that China is becoming much more aggressive because it's becoming more powerful. And if that perception continues, even a President Biden will not be able to easily change the situation. So China has an opportunity to rethink and rediscuss, reportray its views on the South China Sea and the East China Sea, and no longer talk about these areas being vital Chinese interests where China has a sovereign right to control not only territories, but even big bodies of water. That is a very big opportunity for China to make this better, too.
Okay. You said there are 3.5 months, but we have seen over the past 2 to 3 weeks how many things have happened overnight. And my American friend have been telling me an American proverb, which is called, "A week is too long." So from a week to 3.5 months, there are a lot of time that we're talking about here. Once again, my question is very clear. Who will ring in this China-U.S. relations, one of the most important bilateral relations?
I think you're right, and I would say I'm very proud at Brookings to have two colleagues, Chung Lee and David Dollar, who think a lot like you said, and are aware of the kinds of communities in China, including, by the way, both of you, who I'm honored to be with on the show tonight, who want to see if there are ways we can sometimes disagree, but still collaborate and still find ways to minimize our differences and certainly not let them result in all-out adversarial competition or conflict. And so I appreciate that in the spirit of this show and what many of you have said and what Chung Lee and David Dollar and also Ryan Hess are trying to do with Brookings. I'm very proud to have these colleagues who are trying to find a new way forward on a different kind of U.S. China relationship that nonetheless preserves cooperation where possible and minimizes the risks of danger. There are some times where Americans or Chinese feel they should always be defending their own government on a foreign show because you should leave your differences with your fellow Americans aside when you're talking to a foreign audience. No, I will criticize President Trump. I don't think he is a fair-minded president. I think he has some legitimate concerns about Chinese behavior, but the way he pursues those concerns, to my mind, are not always productive, not always thoughtful, and I hope very much that he will not be our president next year. And I think it'll make U.S.-China relations still quite difficult, but much more promising if, in fact, there is a different administration, because President Trump can be very, very spontaneous. He can be very, very impulsive. He can be emotional, and it's not very healthy for the relationship with the two greatest economies and militaries on earth.
Professor Da, you've been listening to my talk with your colleague. Tell me more about, first of all, how would you respond to your colleague about the South China Sea, East China Sea issue? Secondly, your analysis of what exactly is going on. Can the water, once poured out, be taken back?
Yeah, on the South China Sea issue, I think this, of course, I think we all agree that this is a complicated issue. And I think the issue that Michael mentioned, like the sovereignty issue, the disputed features, I think that should be solved by China and other claimants as soon as possible. I think I agree with Michael that the clearer position of China and also other countries will be helpful for everyone. So, but this is very complicated. I really doubt that we can have the time to solve it before the election, or maybe sometimes next year. I think that's very difficult. But again, I agree with him that this is a factor that is have negative impact on China's image in the U.S. and in the world. And back to the China-U.S. relations, one thing I want to maybe echo what Michael said is he criticized the Trump administration's policy. While I have something to say about China, I think, yeah, we all feel very angry about some policies that the administration has taken. But I hope that we can, particularly for the China side, to be calm, because as he said, we only have 100 days before the election, and I don't want to see vicious cycle caused by Trump administration. I think that will be for his benefit, for his domestic political purpose. Of course, when you see something like the closure of the consulate, you have to have some reaction. I think that's, of course, that's natural, that's necessary. But I hope our response can be limited. We don't need to step into tit for tat. I think that's not very good for everyone. So we will back to some more normal situation, but it will not like rolling back to the Obama era. I think that's impossible. So we shouldn't have this kind of unrealistic expectation.
The engagement policy, who should have the right to assess whether it is a success or not? What does diplomacy mean in a relationship that could be more hostile than engagement?
I think yesterday in the New York Times there was an article about how the United States consensus has shifted dramatically on China policy and how this has become bipartisan. And I retweeted that article, but I said the authors of the New York Times piece sort of forget that a few prominent Democrats, Kurt Campbell, Jake Sullivan, Jim Steinberg, Ryan Hess, have actually argued for a U.S.-China relationship that remains as collaborative as possible, that at least stays calm, that tries to keep our disagreements within certain parameters. And in fact, the Democrats and the Trump administration do not agree fundamentally The Trump administration has gotten to the point where it sort of just wants to, in many ways, upset the entire apple cart. And many Democrats and moderate Republicans feel that we need a new relationship, as the professor has said, a new philosophy, a new strategy. But it needs to recognize that there are no more important countries on earth than China and the United States for collaborating on issues ranging from global warming to environmental preservation to stimulating the global economy. And let me also say that most Americans right now may be a little bit frustrated with certain aspects of the U.S. China relationship and Chinese behavior, but this is not a deep-rooted feeling right now. We are much more concerned about our economy. We are much more concerned about COVID-19.
Yes.
We're not interested in demonizing China, and I think that people are interested in finding a new normal in the U.S.-China relationship, if possible.
On the U.S. side, I think those Republicans who opened the door to China, who broke the ice, like past President Nixon, they can assess the engagement strategy. By that engagement, I think China and the U.S. work together. We change the history. We end the Cold War. And for those Democrats, I think people like President Clinton and others, I think they can assess this strategy. With that strategy, China and the U.S. work together, deepen the globalization. And both countries, both China and the U.S., benefited a lot from this globalization. The U.S. Customers enjoy cheaper products from China. They enjoy a higher international status supported by China. And the Chinese people, of course, benefit from the economic ties with the U.S. And also, like Tianwei, you mentioned, young Chinese students, yes. they studied in the U.S., they lived in the U.S., they learned a lot from the U.S. I think all those people can assess the the engagement strategy rather than Secretary Pompeo. I'm very sorry to say that.
Well said, both of you. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Always, this is a platform for discussion, and I really appreciate from your frank insights. Thank you so much, Michael O'Hannon, Da Wei. Thank you, gentlemen.